Son of man, go in among the house of Israel and speak my words to them. For you are not being sent to a people who speak an unintelligible language or an unknown tongue, but to the house of Israel. You are not being sent to many people speaking an unintelligible language or an unknown tongue, whose words you cannot understand. If I would send you to them, they would listen to you. But the house of Israel will refuse to listen to you, for they do not want to listen to me. All those of the house of Israel are hard-headed and hard-hearted.
This video is created primarily for Jehovah's Witnesses, as they are Jehovah's people. Greetings brothers and sisters around the world. My name is Son of Thunder, and I am one of Jehovah's Witnesses.
This episode is a continuation of the previous episode, and it is inspired by Job chapter 5 verse 13. Just to be on record again, I am one of Jehovah's Witnesses and we are the only true religion in the world, but however, as Jehovah's people and organization, we have problems distinct to Jehovah's people. Pointing out these problems only solidifies the fact that we are indeed the only true religion. However, I realize that what I am saying will be difficult to digest for Jehovah's Witnesses, even worse to those who are not. Today's episode is about how we doing as Jehovah's people, as far as the mandate that was instituted by Jesus Christ. While Jesus Christ was on earth, he asked his disciples, "Who am I?" The disciples gave different answers, but Peter answered and said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." To which Jesus said, "Happy are you, for no man revealed this unto you except the Father." Jesus continued and said, "I tell you, upon this rock," meaning Peter, "I shall build my congregation." Indeed, Peter and the other disciples became apostles and elders in forming a congregation in Jerusalem. As the Christianity grew outside Jerusalem, more positions of elders were filled. Paul explained that the congregation functions like body members, and that God gave us gift of men, some as shepherds and teachers. But James said something interesting, a warning rather. As much as it is a desirable thing to pursue being an elder or shepherd in a Christian congregation, James wrote this warning in chapter 3 verse 1. He said, "Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, knowing that we will receive heavier judgment." There comes a lot of responsibilities in becoming an elder or shepherd in a Christian congregation. Even in the nation of Israel it was the same. Today in Jehovah's organization, we have congregations modeled after the first century Christians. Elders or shepherds are responsible to care for Jehovah's flock. There are different kind of elders: a normal elder, presiding overseer, circuit overseer and district overseer. Some elders serve at Bethel but belong to ordinary congregations, and also serve in various committees at Bethel. Notable committees or departments at Bethel are service desk, legal department and branch committee around the world. Branch committees connect to headquarters in New York, where the governing body oversees the overall work of Jehovah's Witnesses, and they individually serve in various committees separately. Primarily, Jehovah's Witnesses' teachings and policies receives a stamp of approval or disapproval from the governing body, through headquarters, also known as Bethel in New York, by means of various committees that are connected to branch committees of all Bethels around the world. Local congregations are connected to either service desk or legal department. In turn, Bethels around the world are connected to the headquarters through branch committees, and those who serve in branch committees are appointed by the governing body. So, local congregations are not autonomous, they receive instructions or direction from Bethel all the way to the top, whether be it matters of teachings or policies. If a local elder acts independently in making a decision, that might be understood as apostasy, especially if the decision taken is not in harmony to that of the governing body. As a result, that elder might be disfellowshipped or deleted as an elder. Same goes to any member of the local congregation. Heresy or apostasy is a disfellowship offense. All this is done in the name of universal brotherly unity. Having laid down the organizational structure, let us examine how elders behave or perform in their respective positions in Jehovah's organization. While doing that, let us evaluate the validity of what James wrote about elders will receive a heavier judgment. But in our evaluation, Let us use Jehovah's way of doing things as Job rightly observed when he said in his book in chapter 5 verse 13, "He catches the wise in their craftiness, and the schemes of the wily are swept away." So, let us use the Watchtower and Awake magazine as a standard in judging matters of child sex abuse, as well as the testimonies that the elder gave recently in the Australian Royal Commission inquiry into Jehovah's Witnesses' response to child sex abuse cases. We shall first read either a Watchtower or Awake quotes, and see how these elders fare in our own craft. Awake, the 8th of April 1997, page 13 and 14. Religion involved. In the August 16, 1993, issue of Newsweek, an article entitled "Priests and Abuse" reported on the worst clerical scandal in the modern history of the U.S. Catholic Church. It stated, while allegations have been lodged against an estimated 400 priests since 1982, some churchmen extrapolate that as many as 2,500 priests have molested children or teenagers. More than money, the scandal has cost the Church severe embarrassment, and some of its moral authority. Other religions throughout the world are in the same situation. Awake, the 22nd of November 2004, page 29, Studies on Sex Abuse by Priests. One study, conducted at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York, disclosed that priests were accused of abuse in more than 95% of dioceses and about 60% of religious orders. The other study, by a Catholic National Review Board, pointed to a culture in Catholic seminaries that tolerated moral laxity. Measuring stick has been determined. Now how do we fare? Watch the next video.
Mr. O'Brien, what happens in the situation? Well, I'll go back a step. Do the elders of a particular congregation accept an obligation to care for the safety of those in that congregation?
Yes, that's why they are shepherds, to care for the flock of God.
And if an allegation is made by a woman that she's been sexually abused, which the elders, or at least the Judicial Committee, or those investigating, accept is true, but there's not a second witness.
Yes.
In that situation, the elders would be continuing to accept the abuser as a member of that congregation, notwithstanding that they knew that he had sexually abused, wouldn't they?
Yes.
How is that reconciled with any obligation they have to care for the safety of those in that congregation?
Well, then, I think it was explained by Mr. Spinks that in that situation the elders would meet with the alleged abuser, even though it can't be proven. They would still have taken the victim's accusations to him or her, and then, as a result of that, would give very clear direction on what restrictions would apply to their association with children, with others in the congregation, and they would monitor that.
And would others in the congregation know that that person had those restrictions placed on them?
No.
That means that supervision is confined to when the elders or an elder is present and observes the abuser.
That's true, but if it was reported to the elders, if it came to their attention that the person was in violation of the restrictions, well, then the elders would take firmer action. The person could even be disfellowshipped if they disregarded.
That's dependent upon the elder observing or
being reported.
Well, how's it going to be reported if the others don't know to report it?
Well, perhaps, yeah, I can't say. I don't know.
Well, it wouldn't happen, would it?
No.
Awake, the 8th of April 1999. Betrayed by those they trusted. In Australia, a review of the book The Battle and the Backlash, The Child Sexual Abuse War commented on child abuse by clergymen and others in positions of trust, said that the organizations involved appeared to be concerned with limiting the damage to their own image and protecting themselves rather than protecting vulnerable children. Measuring stick has been determined, now how do we fare? Watch the next video.
Now you'll see that BCB has said that you asked to speak to her on the basis of information you had received. Do you recall or remember the person BCF who's referred to there? That's a friend of hers to whom she had spoken. The first name of that person, which we're avoiding saying, it should be on a list in front of you.
Yes, I remember, but I don't remember her coming to see me.
Do you remember how you first got to hear of these issues that BCB raised in relation to Bill Neal?
From my recollection, it was BCB and BCC that came to see me at my home and tell me about the allegations.
When you say, from your recollection, you seem somewhat hesitant about that, is that because of the passage of time?
Yes, yes.
Mr. Hawley, this allegation, I take it, when it came to you, you would have seen as a serious one.
Absolutely. There's a huge breach of trust, Your Honour.
Yeah, and as a consequence, I assume it would have stood out for you at the time? There's something unusual?
At the time, it was something that I hadn't dealt with before, and yes, it was a very serious nature. I took it as a huge breach of trust, not only for the person involved, but for the whole congregation. It would have repercussions that would flow through.
And the matter was reported to you because you were in a position of responsibility?
Yes.
Did you take any notes?
No, I didn't.
Can you help us?
I may have done at the time, I'm sorry, but...
you may have done.
I may have, but...
Where are they now?
They would have been destroyed.
Why?
We don't like to have any notes outside of what's kept on file in the congregation.
Why don't you like to have notes of a serious allegation?
There are brief notes kept in the file, but all other notes are destroyed.
Why is that?
I guess it's because we don't want them to fall into the wrong hands of other people to find them and they go through them.
What are the wrong hands?
Well, we don't want our wives knowing what our stuff, what sort of things we're dealing with. We don't want other people in the congregation coming across that information.
So you want to keep it secret to the elders, is that what it amounts to?
I don't know about secret, but we want to try and limit the amount of people that have to have a look at that information, yes.
And why is it that you want to limit the people who will have access to the information?
Just to protect them, I guess. We don't...
Protect who?
Protect the person that's involved in it and the rest of the congregation so that they don't have to know these... I don't know, it's just the protocol that we've had in, so we'll just follow that information.
And would you do the same thing today if someone came and reported to you a serious allegation of sexual assault? Would you destroy any notes?
Yes, that's our practice.
And what about telling other authorities? Are you aware of your obligations if someone tells you of a serious allegation of sexual assault?
If we have any hesitation, we contact the branch for advice on how we should proceed legally and scripturally. We don't attend, or we don't report it to the police. I think we encourage them to do that, but we give them the assistance to do that if they need that.
How do you encourage people to report to the police?
understanding is a little bit unclear because I've never had to do it, so I'm not fully aware on the process. But if it did come to me, I would be just saying, this is a matter that you need to talk to the police about, or the legal authorities, and pursue it that way.
The allegation that came to you, you accepted was serious. Have you, in your time as an elder, had any other people come to you to report a serious allegation of a sexual nature?
Not of sexual assault, but generally misconduct on their own part or someone that they know of.
What do you mean by misconduct?
Well, if someone's committed immorality with somebody else, then that's been brought to my attention, either by the person that's done it in the way of confession, or it may be that they've heard about it and brought it to my attention, and we've investigated it and handled it that way.
Then you record there, we recommended to him that he be stepped down as an elder, and he agreed to this. Now, that seems to suggest that you offered him the opportunity to step down, and he did, rather than you removed him. Now, is there a distinction to be had? How are we to understand it?
No, it's just an unfortunate choice of words there.
So he was definitely deleted or removed?
Removed, yes.
And then you say in the letter, we feel no further action or restrictions need apply. Why was that? Did you consider other actions or restrictions which might be imposed?
In the case of a judicial committee, restrictions against commenting and having parts on meetings and things, what we refer to as restrictions. At this time, we didn't believe that Bill Neal need to have those restrictions put upon him.
Well, what about not having church meetings, Bible studies in his home? That strikes as an appropriate or potentially appropriate restriction which might offer some safety.
I agree, yes. I don't think that action was taken at the time.
Well, it wasn't taken. The point is, did you consider it?
I can't recall considering it, no.
And then if we look at the last paragraph of the letter on the second page, or second last actually, towards the end, it says, also, brothers, I would recommend that once this has died down and it appears that Brother Neal again has the freedom of speech, that he be recommended as an elder again so that he can be of help in the congregation, as he has done in the past. By this dying down, you mean once the controversy has abated, I take it?
It would take a long time, many years in fact, for that to have died down. That's, again, it's an unfortunate wording. In hindsight, we would have worded that much differently to what it is there. Matters of this nature take many years for, if ever, to die down completely.
Well, that was really the focus of your concern there about in taking action against Mr. Neal was about his reputation. Is that right?
Not at all, no.
Well, his reputation in the congregation, his freedom of speech.
His... sorry, what was the questioning again?
Well, that was at the centre of your concern in deciding to remove him as an elder, was his reputation in the congregation.
Not so much his reputation, but how to word it?
Well, it suggests your concern is with his efficacy as an elder.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's right.
I used to celebrate birthdays up until 5 years old.
convey an apology to Your Honour, Commissioner. Technology. See, your concern as an elder there, as I understand it from this letter, was about the proper functioning of your organisation. Is that right?
Yes.
It wasn't about the protection of children in your congregation.
Probably not.
It wasn't about what support you could offer to BCB.
That must have had some bearing on it, but yeah, it was more with his qualifications to teach.
Awake, the 8th of April 1999. Devastating effects. As a result of such abuse, much of which has gone on for many years, some children have developed social and psychiatric problems later in life, well into adulthood. This betrayal of trust is so damaging because a child has been taken advantage of because he or she is a child. Yet, many children who are abused never report the matter, a fact that child abusers rely heavily on. Measuring stick has been determined. Now how do we fare? Watch the next video.
So starting with 2.3, do you see it there before you?
Yes.
You say that child sexual abuse is absolutely not tolerated in the congregation. Any elder or ministerial servant guilty of this is immediately removed from serving in that capacity. An unrepentant child abuser will be disfellowshipped from the congregation, and others from the congregation do not associate with him. So am I to understand that a repentant child abuser is not disfellowshipped?
If a person is repentant, yes, they will not be disfellowshipped.
So they'll be reproved, is that right?
That's true.
And in that, the consequence of reproval is they remain in the congregation?
Yes, with certain restrictions.
Yes. And the practice is that the reasons for approval are not announced to the congregation, is that right?
Can you just repeat that? I didn't quite.
The practice is that the reasons for someone's reproval are not announced to the congregation, is that right?
The reproof, if it's publicly known, they are reproved before the congregation, but not the things that they were reproved for. That's true.
And given that a repentant child abuser remains in the congregation, do you still maintain that that practice shows or is consistent with zero tolerance for child abuse?
Yes, because we would be certainly keeping an eye on someone who was guilty of that in the congregation, and it would be monitored, and that certain restrictions would be in place with regards to their involvement with young children.
And you say you would keep an eye on them. I take it that's you and the other elders.
As elders in the congregation, yes.
Because you would be the people who would know as to why the person was reproved.
That's true.
Yes. And you accept, of course, you couldn't keep an eye on the person all the time.
No.
And if the repentant and now reproved child abuser had abused his own children, he would be back in the home where you would not be able to keep an eye on him.
That would be true in the home.
And in other words, back in the home with the very children whose abuse he had confessed to and thereby earned reproval rather than disfellowship.
I might just clarify that there.
Well, he would be back in the home with his own children whom he had abused and admitted to that abuse.
That's true. The family would know, though, that had also been handled and that he had been reproved for that.
Well, the family might have known it even prior. By the family, I presume you mean his wife.
His wife and children, yeah.
And she might have known it even prior to him being found out and reported to the elders, but the abuse had continued.
I can't add anything.
Well, what steps do you take, if any, in a circumstance like that to protect the children in his home?
Well, the person has been reproved and repentant for what he had done, and the family know that. Of course, we would be able to talk with the family and monitor that as well. That's all I can add.
So you don't, as a matter of course, report to the police or the child protection authorities, do you?
No.
And I suggest that that practice is not consistent with zero tolerance of child sexual abuse in your congregation.
I believe that the person, the victim, has the right to go to the police and to report that, and we do not, and also in the sake of confidentiality, to protect confidentiality there, we feel it's the person's right to go to the police.
Well, what about the case of a young victim who doesn't have the independence or confidence to report to the police? Do you just leave it on the basis that it's that victim's right?
In a case like that, because I don't have the answers, I would myself ring the service desk and I would get direction on that, because a lot of that might be out of my scope.
Awake, the 22nd of August 1991, page 29. Shielding paedophile priests. Some dioceses still shield priests accused of pedophilia, ran a recent headline in the U.S. newspaper National Catholic Reporter. The newspaper interviewed Jeffrey Anderson, a lawyer who specializes in cases of sexual abuse. He estimates that since 1985, when priestly pedophilia came under increased public scrutiny, there have been over 1,000 cases in which priests molested children. Anderson had some harsh words for the Church's response to the ongoing crisis. It is a continuing saga of avoiding responsibility, he charges, decrying the Church's focus on protecting the accused clerics. As a general rule, the institutional response of the Church has been willfully inadequate, both in tending to victims and dealing with risks. Measuring stick has been determined. Now how do we fare? Watch the next video.
And if we look at your 2.4, you say the procedures for preventing sexual abuse of children are, and then you've got a few dot points. Firstly, keeping the congregation clean by disfellowshipping unrepentant sinners. Secondly, teaching the congregation members the high moral standards of the Bible at your meetings. And thirdly, being vigilant as elders to follow through on any accusations made. But I suggest that keeping repentant child abusers within your congregation is not keeping your congregation clean.
As an elder in the congregation, looking after the congregation, the divine law and God's word and what the principles are directed there is what we then put forth. So if a person is repentant and really shows that repentance, then he can remain in the congregation.
Well, I'll come back to the meaning of repentance and its implications shortly. Perhaps we can take a look at your paragraph 4.1. In the meanwhile, that's at page 3. This is the paragraph that you mentioned earlier that you're quite vague on this case. So I'll just ask a couple of questions in relation to it and we can see how much you remember. You say you recall you were involved in one other case of child sexual abuse in the early 1990s. A brother in the congregation was strongly counseled and was deleted as an elder when the allegations of abuse first came to light. However, a number of other complaints were reported in the next couple of years, and he was therefore disfellowshipped. Now, am I to understand that the other complaints that were reported in the next couple of years were with regard to abuse that had occurred after he had been deleted as an elder, or committed after he had been deleted as an elder?
That I cannot recall and give you an answer on that, because what I've written there is from my vague memory. It's such a long time ago, I cannot recall details.
The reasons for his deletion as an elder or removal as an elder would not have been announced, is that right?
It would just have been announced that he was deleted.
Yes. And he was not reported to the police or the child protection authorities by anyone, was he?
Not that I'm aware of.
And am I to understand this correctly, that congregation members would not have been warned about his propensity for child abuse?
That I can't remember at all.
Well, it stands to reason, doesn't it? Because he was considered repentant and therefore not disfellowshipped, and therefore the reasons would not have been announced and the congregation not made aware. Is that not right?
I don't... The sequence of events there, I don't really understand, because he was disfellowshipped.
Ultimately?
Yes.
Yes, I'm talking about prior to his disfellowship.
I really have no memory of that. The only memory I have there is the vague memory of ones in the congregation coming to a meeting and having to face him and say what they had seen. And that I remember, because I remember about 3 or 4 doing that. But that's all I remember.
So
I don't remember anything else.
It was the case, was it, that there were a number of witnesses to the abuse? Is that right? Is that what I'm to understand from what you just said?
No. The memory I have was of this person, the ones from our congregation coming and saying that how the way he had been looking at up people's skirts, and if they were sitting on the convention looking up and deliberately looking, that's what I remember, only of that case.
Now, you say you can't remember whether the further allegations which surfaced after he had been removed but prior to him being disfellowshipped occurred after he was removed. Is that right?
I have no other memory.
Now, coming to the case of BCG, you know who it is whom I'm referring to.
Yes.
Yes, and I'm going to endeavour not to use her name or the names of others involved, and I'm sure you'll understand and try and do the same.
I will very much try.
Yes, thank you. Now, did you watch or listen to BCG's testimony last week?
Only very little glimpses of it. I didn't want to listen to it so I could be objective, so that's how I thought last week.
I'm struggling to understand that, Mr. DeRoy. In what sense would you consider your objectivity might be changed by or compromised by listening to a testimony?
I wanted to be honest in any questions that you ask in this Royal Commission from my memory of it at the time, and in line with what I'd written here as a statement. So I felt my forthright answers would be better just coming and listening from the questions you asked. So that's how I felt at that time.
Do you remember how you first came to learn of BCG's allegations of sexual abuse by her father?
We were handling a matter with the father, with regards to another woman, and we were looking at what was happening there, and it was in the context of that judicial meeting that now BCG and her fiancé came, and then the allegations that were made against the father. So it's in that respect.
And at that stage, do you remember what the allegations were? In other words, what is it that BCG said that her father had done?
The specifics of it, no, I can't remember. I have been trying to remember from my own memories on that. The only thing that I do remember was part of it when it came to being in the shower and with the door and how he acted there. That part I do remember.
Well, what are you referring to? You're speaking in riddles. If you haven't heard BCG's testimony, what is it that you're referring to exactly? What is it that you remember about the shower and the door?
No, you asked whether I remember anything of at that meeting, and they're the things. I remember that little aspect of it.
Do you just remember someone mentioned a shower and a door?
No, I remember that little aspect of it.
Well, what is the aspect? That's what I'm trying to get at. I'm asking you to say, what is it that you remember that was said which involved a shower and a door? Because the way you've explained it so far, hold on,
sorry.
You and I mustn't speak at the same time.
Sorry about that.
The way you've said it so far, you seem to be assuming that I know what you're talking about, and I'm asking you not to assume that and just tell me what it is that you're talking about.
What I remember is the accusation at the time that the father was trying to get through the bathroom door with BCG there in the bathroom. That I remember.
And do you remember that it went further than that, and BCG said that she had been sexually abused by her father?
Not at that particular time.
Sorry, do you mean you don't remember her speaking of that other allegation, or you remember it being spoken of at a different time?
What I remember is that part of the allegation. It's only after all the years later that I know that there were other things as well. So at that particular time, in the original meeting that we had, that's all I knew at that time.
So you say the other matters weren't discussed at the meeting at all, do you?
Because I don't remember all the allegations at that time, it was because it was just between her word against the father. That is all I really remember of that. It's just
not
so
understanding.
long.
You mean other things were spoken about that you can't remember?
I can't remember. That's all. What I've said there is all I can remember.
Very well.
Sorry, Your Honour.
All right. Well, I'll come back to some documents in a minute, which may assist in refreshing your memory on that. But before I get to that, can I ask you to have a look, and it'll come up on the screen, at BCG's statement to the Royal Commission, paragraphs 47 and 48. So that's the foot of page 11. Ringtail 11. So do you see that BCG said that after my mother told me about what my father had done to my older sister, it occurred to me that I should check with my two younger sisters if he had ever done anything to them. Together, my mother and I spoke to my younger sisters. They were about 5 and 7 or 8 at the time. Both of them said to me, yes, Dad has been rude. I remember my youngest sister saying words to the effect, He put his penis between my legs when we were laying down in the lounge room watching TV. I remember my other younger sister saying words to the effect of, he made me have a shower with him and he touched me and massaged my pee in the shower. And then in 48, BCG said, my mother came with me to tell the elders about my younger sisters. I remember that Ron DeRoy said to us, we don't want to talk to your sisters because they are too young to know what they are talking about. This response made me so upset because irrespective of their ages, my sisters were victims too, and the abuse should have been considered by the elders. Now, do you remember that report by BCG and her mother to you and the other elders about her younger sisters?
No, I do not.
I'll take it in saying you don't remember it. You're not saying that BCG is wrong about her memory of it.
See, my recollection is that we were handling that situation at that judicial committee, and I don't recall that at all coming out of that judicial committee.
So you just don't recall it, is that it?
I do not recall.
You're not saying it didn't happen?
If that had happened, that would have given us more witnesses to follow through on, and then we would have handled that. But my recollection is that is not the case.
Let me understand. So you had a judicial committee already formed, chaired by you, is that right?
That's right.
And it had Mr. Bowditch and Mr. Ally as the other two members.
That's correct.
And it was considering some allegations with regard to BCH, that's BCG's father, BCH's intentions with regard to another woman, is that right?
That's correct.
And you were in the process of investigating the issues that arose around that.
That's correct.
And you recall that in the context of that, BCG and her then fiance, I think is BCI, BCJ, reported, what you remember, an incident about the father trying to break the door to get into the shower while BCG was in the shower, is that right?
I do recall
And
it.
you say you don't remember more
I don't remember more than that.
about BCG's allegations with regard to her father.
No.
But you remember enough to say that it was her allegations against his, and on that basis you weren't able to resolve them.
That's right. It was one person's word against another.
Yes. Now, those allegations, they came to you as part of a judicial committee already formed, is that right?
That's true.
So in hearing them and dealing with them, you didn't go through the step of a preliminary investigative process by two elders and then a report to the elders who then decided to form a judicial committee. You just subsumed it into the existing judicial committee, is that right?
I understand that's what happened.
Yes. And in the process then of that judicial committee, you questioned BCG about what she was alleging about her father, is that right?
That's true.
And you did that in the presence of her father.
Her father, when we were talking with BCG, it would have only been us as three elders talking with her.
So are you saying you did not require her to make those allegations also in the presence of her father?
At the time, from memory, she also faced BCH and made that accusation straight to him.
So in other words, it was in the presence of her father?
Yes, then it was, yes.
Yes. And that was part of your judicial committee?
That was part of our committee.
Right. And the father got aggressive, is that right?
He was quite angry at her.
And he had to be restrained?
I don't remember that at all.
If we go back in BCG's statement to paragraph 43, So firstly, she says at the first committee meeting, it was the case that there was more than one meeting with BCG in relation to these allegations. Is that right?
Yes.
So she says at the first meeting, the elders sat me in a room at the Kingdom Hall and came in one at a time and asked me to tell them what had happened. Do you recall it like that?
I don't really recall that. All I recall is that we, as a committee, would have asked her in and to talk to the whole three of us there.
All right, so perhaps that's captured in the next sentence. After they came in together and asked me more questions. So, in other words, the three of you asked her questions.
The three of us asked her questions.
And then she said they repeated this process several times. Do you recall that?
No, but that possibly would be correct.
And she says, it felt like I was being interrogated and that the elders were trying to find inconsistencies in my story to catch me out. Would that be right?
I don't believe that's correct. As the three of us as elders there, we were also fathers. I have 3 daughters as well, and we felt sickened by what a father would do to his daughter. So when we were talking with BCG there, that's how we felt. Because we had known her for such a long time. She was like our family. So the way that we talked with BCG was to try to put her at ease, to help her to be able to really make it clear to us what exactly happened, so she would feel comfortable to do that. So that's the view.
Mr. DeRoy, what sickened you?
That a father would do anything like that to his daughter.
Anything like what?
Abuse his daughter.
Abuse in what way?
In what way? Because my memory is so unclear from that long ago, I know already how I felt towards a father doing that to his children. So when the allegations were made, which I can't remember much of, as I said, a father doing that was not what a father should do.
So whilst you can't remember what it was exactly you were told, certainly it sickened you, is that right?
Yes.
It repulsed you?
Yes, it's that's that would be, for me as a father, I view it as despicable. That's so we, here we were as 3 family men, having someone who has been hurt by her father, and we felt very much for her. That's the way how we feel.
So the allegations that were made to you then were serious allegations?
They were very serious allegations.
They were more than forcing a door open?
Well, I can't remember any more of that.
Well,
but they were serious enough, but because it was one person's word against another, regardless of whether we believed it, we could only go so far. So,
did you believe it?
Did I believe it? Yes.
So you believed it, you were sickened by it, but you couldn't do anything about it?
No. The Bible principle...
Do you think that's a fair position to end up in for a young lady who you say was abused in a way that sickened you?
No. But we are following well-established principle of that we've got to have, it cannot be just one witness.
Because just seeking to address it for a moment from a legal perspective, what I understand from the statements is that one has a governing body operating in, or situated in New York, but having an operation, I suppose, throughout the world, and then branches in various geographic areas, and also congregations
Yes.
within the jurisdiction of each branch. That's right so far, isn't it?
Yes.
And in Australia, it said that each congregation is in a legal sense, voluntary association. Is that right?
Yes.
And yet the congregations take their direction and instructions from the branch, which in turn takes its direction and instruction from the governing body. That would be right, factually.
Yes, I think that's a reasonable.
So now, by operation of what legal rule or norm does that occur? In other words, by what legal rule or norm does the congregation take its direction from the branch? Is there a constitution, a contract, a corporation? Is there something that does it?
Not that I'm aware of.
So is it not the case that the governing body sets out what the roles and responsibilities of all the various structures are and their relationship to each other, and the whole system internationally is operated in accordance with that?
You're really talking to me about an area I don't have much experience in terms of that. I just work in a local branch. But I think in general terms what you're saying I would understand to be correct.
And is there a manual or a document published by the governing body which sets that out, what its responsibilities are, what the branch's responsibilities are, and so on?
I'm unaware of any such document.
So is there not, to your knowledge, a document which sets out the responsibilities of each of the governing body committees, for example?
I have no knowledge about that whatsoever.
And a document perhaps which sets out how members of branch committees are to be appointed?
I have no knowledge about that. I've never seen or heard of such things.
Can I just understand, are you the senior lawyer advising the Jehovah's Witnesses in Australia?
I'm not sure about senior, but I look after the legal department, but I'm being asked questions about things that I really haven't been involved in at all.
I know, but I'm trying to get to understand your relationship to the management structure in Australia and in New York, you see. And normally in an organisation, if there's a legal department and a head lawyer, then that person's services would be used to advise in relation to documents, the meaning of documents, the drafting of documents and so on.
Nothing. I've never been involved in any of the document types of situations that I'm being asked about at all.
Well, then who in the branch here holds the reins? Where does
the branch committee?
The committee. And how many people are on that committee?
Probably 9 or 10, but it might be, it's around that figure. I'm not actually certain, but it's somewhere around that figure.
And is that their job, to be members of that committee, or do they have other roles in the organisation?
They are appointed members of the branch committee. They collectively serve together, but they would have administrative roles at the branch doing different things.
At the branch, though?
Yes, at the branch.
They're all people who work at the branch?
Yes, they're at the branch.
And is one of them the head, as it were, of the committee?
I think it's first among equals. I don't think anyone's head of the branch committee as such, but Mr. O'Brien cares for the coordination of that particular branch committee. But I don't think anyone has greater authority or lesser authority. If you remember the branch committee, I understand you're an equal member with the branch committee.
And the next step in the hierarchy organisation of the Jehovah's Witness from the branch committee is to where?
I think the branch committee goes back to the governing body.
In New York?
In New York, that's as I understand it.
Right. And do you know whether they have to provide a report to the governing body?
I've never been on a branch committee. I don't know what happens there.
You mean you work as the Jehovah's Witness lawyer, but you have no knowledge of what?
I have never been involved in a report given that way
because it's not a legal matter. Nothing's been ever been discussed with me about that.
And the branch committee members, Mr. Toole, are appointed by the governing body, is that right?
I understand that's the position, yes.
And you say your understanding is that the branch committee members are equals. One of them is actually designated coordinator. Is that not right?
Yes, I think he's the coordinator of the branch committee.
Yes, and that designation or responsibility also is an appointment by the governing body.
I believe so, but I'm not absolutely certain, but I believe so. I'm sorry I don't have a lot of information on that, but I've never been involved.
There are other copies coming shortly, but I'd just like to show you, there's a copy for you. I'd like to show you a document. You see it's headed Branch Organisation, effective December 15, 1977, revised February 2003, and it's said to be, what says this material is Branch Organisation, this material in the Branch Organisation, being the name of the publication, should not be copied or duplicated except with permission of the Branch Committee. It's published in the USA, take it or understand it by the governing body. Have you seen this publication before?
No, I have not.
Do you know if this is the current edition?
I would have no idea.
Your Honour, I call for any revision or subsequent addition to the publication Branch Organisation. Let's take the situation in a family where one of the children, let's say the eldest, reports having been abused by her father.
Yes, sorry, is there a question?
Yes, if that report is accepted as having validity, you would accept that the potential is that the other children in the family remain at risk.
That is correct.
And by not reporting to the authorities, is the case not that the confidentiality of the one who reported is regarded as being more important than to protect those who are still at risk?
No, Mr. Stewart, if I could just, what I'm trying to highlight is there are several factors that make it hard for a minister of religion to make a clear-cut or quick decision on this matter. Obviously, I think, again, what has been highlighted to the Commission, the elders should encourage the guardian of the child or whoever is in that family arrangement that is not the perpetrator to notify the authorities.
Leaving aside the question of overriding mandatory law from the civil authorities, do you see the possibility within the scriptures as you've identified them for a change in the practice of Jehovah's Witnesses? In other words, would it be within the scriptures for the Jehovah's Witness organisation to adopt a policy which says that in cases where there are others at risk, a report must be made to the authorities?
That is a possible thing for us to consider, and I think already the assumption is there that if any elder was to see that there was some definite risk, that their conscience should move them to do that. But the point I was trying to make, Mr. Stewart, is there are other scriptural factors that maybe make that a little complicated, and it would certainly be a lot easier if we had mandatory laws on that.
Now, turning to another aspect that we've dealt with, which is the question of the two-witness rule, you'll be aware that if there's no confession, then two witnesses to serious wrongdoing are required, or to two similar events of serious wrongdoing, in order that there is sufficient evidence to establish a judicial committee. Do you understand that?
I do understand that.
Is there a scriptural basis to that?
The two witness testimony, is that what you're asking, Mr. Stewart?
That's right.
Absolutely. If I could take you to the book of Matthew, chapter 18. Matthew 18. And that's on page 1330. Matthew 18.
Yes,
and here
16.
the words of our Lord, verse 16, that's correct. The words of our Lord Jesus Christ. But this is talking in the sense of a judicial setting. And if he does not listen, take along with you one or two more, so that on the testimony of two or three witnesses, every matter may be established. So from this, and I can give you a list of several other scriptures, but I don't want to test your patience and take you to all these verses. But basically, this is a theme right through the Christian Greek scriptures, the New Testament, that the rules for evidence for a judicial hearing involve two witnesses. But please allow me to say further, this is only talking about setting up a judicial committee. It doesn't mean to say that Jehovah's Witnesses would feel that someone is totally 100% squeaky clean just because there was only one witness to the crime.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by 100% squeaky clean. I mean, the reality is if there's only one witness in the case of child sexual abuse, then it cannot be taken further by the elders. And as it's put in the literature, it's left in the hands of Jehovah.
Yes, but please may I correct your comment on that with all due respect. You see, by squeaky clean, I'm meaning that it's not like someone being exonerated by a judicial hearing whereby there's double jeopardy and they can't be taken before the judicial hearing again. Our literature has said, and we agree, that in most cases with children with child abuse, they are telling the truth. That's an established thing. They're not making up these stories. So immediately the elders would put into place protection measures to help, to make sure that the family cares for the child and that due steps are taken to protect the child.
So I take it you say that that is what elders around the world should definitely do.
They should do, because Christian principles indicate if they realize a child is in a dangerous situation, action should be taken. The judicial hearing is simply us determining whether a person, the perpetrator, has committed a sin that would warrant them being put out of the congregation. But that doesn't mean to say we're stupid and that we think that someone hasn't done something.
Well, I want to take you back then to the scriptural basis for that. So you've referred to Matthew 18, verse 16. And as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, that in turn really is a reference back to Deuteronomy 19, verse 15. In other words, what Jesus Christ was doing is referring back to that aspect of Mosaic law dealing with evidence.
He did quote, as he often did, from the Mosaic law, but he gave it Christian application.
So, but that is an element to be found in the Mosaic law as set out in Deuteronomy 19:15. Is that right?
It is an element that is found in both the Old Testament and the New Testament.
Now, what I'm interested in is, and perhaps you can help me on this, is that why that applies to a case of sexual assault when clearly what was being addressed in the reference in Matthew that you gave us was not a question of sexual assault.
Yes, if I can just clarify that a little further then. There are basic principles that the Bible highlights, and I can give you 2 Corinthians 13, verse 1. Sorry, Mr. Stewart.
Yes, carry on.
You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 19. It's not just a one-off verse, but this is a basic principle for rules of evidence as found in the Bible. But if I could just emphasize again, this is only referring to a church-appointed committee that determines whether a person should remain in the congregation or not. The judicial system, and I'm sure if I can save the court's or the commission's time, I'm sure you're going to want to refer me back to Deuteronomy where it mentions the penalty of stoning. But what we need to remember is the laws that were given back in the nation of Israel. You had the judiciary, you had the punishment system, everything combined together. When the Christian arrangement came about, with our Lord Jesus Christ giving us direction, the Christian church does not have the authority to throw people into prison, to execute, or to do anything to them. So the judicial system in the Christian arrangement involves the spiritual cleanliness of the congregation, and the rules of evidence remain the same all the way through.
Well, Mr. Jackson, that's exactly the point I want to get to. You'll be familiar, and perhaps we can go to Deuteronomy 22, 23 to 27.
Deuteronomy 22, 23 to 27.
Page 304. So where it said that if a man is found lying down with a woman who is the wife of another man, both of them must die together. Now, let me just preface this. I'm not addressing the question of the stoning. I'm addressing the question of evidence. The man who lay down with the woman as well as the woman. Sorry, I read that badly. Both of them must die together. The man who lay down with the woman as well as the woman. So you must remove what is bad out of Israel. Then it says, if a virgin is engaged to a man and another man happens to meet her in the city and lies down with her, you should bring them both out to the gate of that city and stone them to death. The girl, because she did not scream in the city, and the man, because he humiliated the wife of his fellow man. So you must remove what is evil from your midst. And then the next example is the one I'm particularly interested in. If, however, the man happened to meet the engaged girl in the field, and the man overpowered her and lay down with her, and the man who lay down with her is to die by himself, and you must do nothing to the girl. The girl has not committed a sin deserving of death. This case is the same as when a man attacks his fellow man and murders him, for he happened to meet her in the field, and the engaged girl screamed, but there was no one to rescue her. So the point of this last example is that there's no second witness, is there? Because the woman's in the field, she screamed, but there was no one to rescue her. Do you accept that?
Could I explain, Mr. Stewart, that, you see, I think already under testimony, some of Jehovah's Witnesses have explained that the two witnesses needed can be, in some cases, the circumstances. I think, was it an example given?
I'll come to that, Mr. Jackson.
Okay, so
we'll get through this a lot quicker and easier if we just address it one step at a time. So the present step...
So the answer to your question?
The present step is this, is that in that example you accept it's a case where there was no other witness beyond the woman herself.
There was no other witness except the woman herself, but added to that were the circumstances.
Yes, well, the circumstances were that she was raped in the field.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but they were circumstances.
And it was sufficient, there being only one witness, it was nevertheless sufficient for the conclusion that the man should be stoned to death.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now, is it...
I think we're agreeing on the point.
Yes, is it not the case that had Jesus been asked about a case of sexual abuse, he may have referred back to this part of Deuteronomy and said that it's not required to have two witnesses?
I certainly would like to ask Jesus that, and I can't at the moment. I hope to in the future. But that's a hypothetical question which if we had an answer, then we could support what you said.
Well, it's hypothetical in a sense, but really what I'm driving at is the scriptural basis, and you the scholar, I'm not, is the scriptural basis to the two-witness rule really so solid, or is there not space for your governing body to recognise that in cases of sexual abuse it need not apply?
Again, if I could just mention the fact that we've already acknowledged that circumstances can also be one of the witnesses.
Well, I'll come to that, but my question is a different one. It's whether the scriptural basis to the two-witness rule in relation to cases of sexual abuse has a proper foundation.
We believe it does because of the number of times that principle is emphasized in the scriptures.
Now, you'll be aware, of course, in the case of adultery, so long as there are two witnesses to the circumstances of opportunity, that will be sufficient.
Yes.
So, in other words, there needn't be two witnesses to the act of adultery itself, but only to the circumstances of opportunity.
Sorry, you would need to walk me through that a little further.
Well,
I'm not quite sure.
I was trying to do it by a shortcut, but I'll take you to the document. It's in the same Shepherd the Flock book, which is tab 120 at page 61. So you'll see you have paragraph 11 there.
Yes, I do.
So this is also in the chapter dealing with determining whether a judicial committee should be formed. On the subject of evidence testified to by at least two witnesses that the accused stayed all night in the same house with a person of the opposite sex or in the same house with a known homosexual under improper circumstances. That's the heading. And then it goes on to say elders should use good judgment in assessing the situation before forming a judicial committee. And in the second dot point, it says if there are no extenuating circumstances, the judicial committee would be formed on the basis of strong circumstantial evidence of porneia. And you'll see at the foot of the page, there's an example of a married brother spending an inordinate amount of time with his female secretary. And 2 lines from the bottom, it says, later, when he claims to be leaving overnight for a business trip, his suspicious wife and a relative follow him to the secretary's home, and they observe essentially the opportunity of adultery to have taken place. And then those 2 witnesses will be sufficient to establish the case. Do you see that?
I do see that.
So now, in the case of child sexual abuse, it should be, should it not, that a witness to an opportunity for the sexual abuse to have taken place would be the sufficient second witness.
Yes, if there is no what does it say here?
Extenuating circumstances.
Under improper circumstances.
Yeah. So a second witness to circumstantial or corroborating evidence would be sufficient to fulfill the second witness requirement.
That's a very large question, and I think it's something that we would need to consider carefully.
Yes, well, it's just important as to whether the second witness has to be a witness to the abuse itself, or to what extent it can be, he or she can be a witness to circumstantial or corroborating evidence. So let me use an example. What about the trauma, evident trauma of the survivor? Would that be able to be taken into account as corroborating evidence?
Yes, it would need to be taken into account. And if I could mention, Mr. Stewart, these are the things that we're interested in following up on after the Royal Commission, just to make sure that everything is in place, because certainly these are the things we're interested in.
Yes, but you'll understand, Mr. Jackson, what we're interested in is how much room you have to move, as it were, to what extent you're bound by the scriptures and to what extent you have flexibility to change your processes.
That's right.
Mr. Spinks yesterday explained that the reference on a letter to LLC is a reference to the legal department. Do you agree with his evidence?
Yes, that's right.
Yes. I'll show you tab 40. 40. You'll see this is a letter a week or so later to the presiding overseer at the Logan Home congregation, and the reference is LLC. I take it that came from the legal department.
I've seen that letter. I looked at it in the bundle. That is the symbol that I used. I don't recall writing this letter. I must have had some input into it. It wouldn't have my symbol on top, but I don't disagree with the contents.
Well, what this letter does, Mr. Toole, is it asks the Logan Home congregation to look into the position of BCH and to appoint 2 elders to approach him and inform him of various things, and he should be asked to explain and so on, as an investigation preceding a possible judicial committee, not so?
Based on the fact that he's supposedly, according to paragraph 2, is it, that he's actually on the public record of pleading guilty to these charges.
Now, what this suggests, Mr. Toole, is that what you did in response to the 2 letters is you wrote this letter to the congregation. You didn't take it to take the letters to the service department.
No, I would never deal with a matter. This is a service department matter. But because it's a court case on foot, they no doubt came and discussed it with me. Maybe I produced a rough draft. It was finalised, but anything to do with child abuse is service related.
Mr. Toole, this letter carries your reference, and it deals with legal matters. You seem to be trying to distance yourself from it and suggest that this came from the service department.
No, I'm not suggesting that. I'm saying it would have gone through with the approval of the service department. That's all.
Yes, with the approval of the service department, but sent and signed off by you.
Well, I never signed the letter. It would have gone through the service department out to the congregation.
Approved by you.
Well, it would. If I drafted the letter, the whole of the letter, I would have been happy with it, but when it went to service, they may well have wanted to revise various aspects of it.
You mean to say the way in which your office runs is that they're letters with your reference on them that you didn't approve?
Anything at all to do with service, to do with child abuse, that's dealt with by the service department.
Well, that can't be so, because this letter and many others in the bundle here have LLC or LLD and so on.
Yes, that's true.
Yes.
That's true, but it all goes back through the service department because they're the ones responsible for dealing with these matters. Now, they might have had some legal input or some input from the legal department, but nevertheless, it all goes back through there because they're responsible. We are really just assisting them in relation to what they're doing.
You'll see you say there, where the law does not require ministers of religion to report allegations of child abuse, the legal department has been instructed to direct the elders to clearly explain to the victim and or their families that they have an absolute right to report the matter to the authorities and that they should feel completely free to do so. So you say there the legal department has been instructed to direct, and then you go on to say what you've been instructed to direct. Who gave that instruction?
Well, I understand that's just a branch committee direction in harmony with the directions we've been given.
So it's well, let's just clarify the terminology there. You say the legal department has been instructed. So is that the case? The legal department has been instructed to direct, as you set out in that paragraph? In harmony with the direction that we were given in that previous letter about reporting. My understanding clearly is that's the direction that we are expected to give
whenever we receive a call in relation to this matter.
So it's the branch committee that's given that instruction to the legal department?
I understand in harmony with that letter.
All right. Are you in harmony with which letter?
The letter that's referred to just a little earlier, that one there, October the 1st, 2012.
And that's at tab 124.
And that certainly is our practice.
Well, can you identify where in the letter the legal department is instructed or directed to direct elders to clearly explain to the victim and or their families that they have an absolute right to report the matter to the authorities?
No, I can't, but it's in the spirit of what's being discussed there. It's always been my understanding that that's the direction that we're to give.
Well, Mr. Toole, just to be clear, you say in your statement that the legal department has been instructed to do something. I understand now you're shifting from that and you're saying that that's in the spirit of this letter. It's not an instruction, is that right?
Well, we don't have a written instruction to do that, no, if that's what you're asking.
Well, you don't have any instruction, do you?
Well, we've been informed that's what we should be advising people when they call.
Isn't it the case that the legal department advises on legal obligations to report or otherwise, and then with regard to other matters, the call from the elders is then passed on to the service desk?
I've been taking these calls for pretty well exclusively now for the last 2 or more years. The direction I give specifically when someone calls in, we discuss the matter as far as any mandatory reporting obligations that may apply. And then I make a particular point. I say, now, if the mandatory reporting obligation doesn't apply in a certain state, I say, I want you two elders to go back to the victim or their family and explain to them very clearly that they have the absolute right to be able to go and report this matter to the authorities. That's their privilege, and they need to understand that, and that you will support them in whatever decision they make. That's the instructions I give every time.
So that's your practice as opposed to being something you've been instructed to do?
Well, I haven't received formal instructions, that's what I'm saying, but that's what I understand clearly we're being asked to do.
And you say you've done this exclusively for, did you say 2 years or 2.5 years?
Yeah, about approximately 2 years. I've been taking the calls myself.
And these are calls about allegations of child sexual abuse?
Yes.
And how many such calls have you taken in that period, would you estimate?
I couldn't tell you, but we probably get 3, sometimes 4 a month.
As I understand you're saying on your understanding that that's not required by your rules. In other words, your rules do not require the survivor of a sexual assault to have to make her allegation in the presence of the person whom she accuses as having assaulted her.
If I understand your question correctly, from what I've heard from Mr. Spink's testimony, that is not something that we require now. I'm prefacing this in the fact that it's not my field that I work with every day. Mr. Spinks and those who work in the service department work with these matters, but that is my understanding.
Yes. And so do you accept then that that should be made clear in your documents, manuals and instructions? In other words, that it should be made clear that a survivor of a sexual assault should not have to make her allegation in the presence of the person whom she accuses as having assaulted her?
Absolutely.
Awake, the 8th of November 1990, page 31. Our shame is clear to the whole world. Usually these cases are hushed up, and no significant disciplinary action is taken. Perhaps a priest is transferred to another parish or duty, where the depravity might start again. On this occasion the Archbishop was moved to resign after stating, "We are a sinful church. We are naked. Our anger, our pain, Our anguish, our shame are clear to the whole world. Measuring stick has been determined, now how do we fare? Watch the next video.
Then you record there, we recommended to him that he be stepped down as an elder, and he agreed to this. Now, that seems to suggest that you offered him the opportunity to step down, and he did, rather than you removed him. Now, is there a distinction to be had? How are we to understand that?
No, it's just an unfortunate choice of words there.
So he was definitely deleted or removed?
Removed, yes.
And then you say in the letter, we feel no further action or restrictions need apply. Why was that? Did you consider other actions or restrictions which might be imposed?
In the case of a judicial committee, restrictions against commenting and having parts on meetings and things are what we refer to as restrictions. At this time, we didn't believe that Bill Neal need to have those restrictions put upon him.
Well, what about not having church meetings, Bible studies in his home? That strikes as an appropriate or potentially appropriate restriction which might offer some safety.
I agree, yes. I don't think that action was taken at the time.
Well, it wasn't taken. The point is, did you consider it?
I can't recall considering it, no.
And then if we look at the last paragraph of the letter on the second page, or second last actually, towards the end, it says also, brothers, I would recommend that once this has died down and it appears that Brother Neal again has the freedom of speech, that he be recommended as an elder again so that he can be of help in the congregation, as he has done in the past. By this dying down, you mean once the controversy has abated, I take it?
It would take a long time, many years in fact, for that to have died down. That's, again, it's an unfortunate wording. In hindsight, we would have worded that much differently to what it is there. Matters of this nature take many years for, if ever, to die down completely.
Well, that was really the focus of your concern there about in taking action against Mr. Neal was about his reputation. Is that right?
Not at all, no.
Well, his reputation in the congregation, his freedom of speech.
His, sorry, what was the questioning again?
Well, that was at the centre of your concern in deciding to remove him as an elder, was his reputation in the congregation.
Not so much his reputation, but how to word it?
Well, it suggests your concern is with his efficacy as an elder.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's right.
I used to celebrate birthdays up until 5 years old. No birthdays, no Christmas.
I'll convey an apology to Your Honour, Commissioner. Technology. See, your concern as an elder there, as I understand it from this letter, was about the proper functioning of your organisation. Is that right?
Yes.
It wasn't about the protection of children in your congregation.
Probably not.
It wasn't about what support you could offer to BCB.
that must have had some bearing on it, but yeah, it was more with his qualifications to teach.
Awake the 8th of November 1990, page 31. Our shame is clear to the whole world. A judicial inquiry showed that accusations had been made over a period of 15 years, but the police and government officials failed to act decisively against the offenders. And even worse, the church hierarchy failed to act decisively. They were accused of being more concerned about the offending priests than about the victims. Yet, what does the Catholic Bible say about such immoral practices? Measuring stick has been determined, now how do we fare? Watch the next video.
I suggest what happened here, Mr. Ally, is that you and your fellow members of the committee wrongly concluded that there wasn't sufficient evidence to accept BCG's allegations.
That we'd wrongly concluded it?
Yes.
That I don't see it that way. I'm sorry.
And you then just ignored those allegations?
No. No, that's incorrect.
You didn't even record it in your report to the branch?
No. We needed to report what we had, our findings were as to this person, but we did follow up, I think, within a reasonably very short time on the other allegations.
Well, what then happened is there was an appeal by BCH.
Yes.
And the allegations were resurfaced in the appeal. Is that right?
Yes.
And in the appeal, BCH admitted the allegations.
I believe so. That could have been the case.
You were there, weren't you?
I was there as a listener or a bystander.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there was
we were not directly involved.
There was an appeal committee of elders Bennett, Wilson, and Maraziz.
Joe Mrazis?
Yes.
Yeah.
Were they from another congregation?
Yes.
And the judicial committee of you and Mr. Bardich and Mr. DeRoy, you were also present during the appeal committee
as
hearing.
Witnesses, yes.
Yes. And in that hearing, when confronted with the allegations, BCH then admitted that he had abused his daughter, BCG.
I can't remember that. That may have happened.
And in any event, the appeal committee then confirmed the disfellowshipping and added to the grounds you had found of loose conduct and lying, added the grounds of porneia in the form of gross sexual acts against his teenage daughter 5 or 6 times during the latter part of the previous year.
I believe so, yes.
If you felt you didn't have sufficient proof, Mr. Ally, did you consider reporting these matters to the police?
No.
BCG didn't ask you not to report to the police, did she?
No.
Even after the confession by BCH, you still didn't consider reporting to the police?
I can't recall that she did, no.
Well, I asked whether you considered reporting the matters even after the confession.
I did?
Yes. Did you? You didn't, did you?
No, I didn't. No.
And can you explain why not?
Well, you mean after the appeals committee?
At either stage, you'd had 2 confessions, judging by your notes, but at either stage, why didn't you consider reporting to the police?
Well, that was still in the process of finding the facts on the charge of porneia that he was guilty on porneia and needed to be disfellowshipped on that.
Well, after the appeal committee, the facts had been found. There was no fact-finding continuing. After the appeal committee, why did you not consider reporting to the police?
Because it's still a matter of dignifying the person, of allowing them that opportunity to do that.
Do you not think this man should go to jail?
I'm very happy that eventually he did, for what he did.
Well, that was only because BCG, some years later, found the strength after she'd left the church to report to the police. In the interim, you and your colleagues didn't report to the police at all.
No, we didn't.